Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Kaf Aleph. Today's stuff is sponsored by the Greenstone family in honor of Hadina Hajjaj and Amy Fred's birthdays. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started today. We have a very long daf. Just to remind everyone, Gila Fine's class started. It was very, very well attended. And if you missed it, don't worry, it's all recorded. You can register through our system and access the class and let us know if you have any issues. Okay, we're going to get started. Poretz la sotlo derech. We're at the bottom of Kaf Amud. We're now continuing in our discussion of the king. Okay, yesterday in the Hebrew side, it went up the Gefet about really this whole concept and the different opinions about a king. And actually, Rabbanit kind of Dreyfus went into different, an in-depth look really at the different opinions in the Mishnah and the actually of Rav and Shmuel. And Rav said it was really just to threaten them, but to threaten them to the extent that both thought there was a commandment to have a king. Not everyone understands it that way, and there's an in-depth shiur there, which should go up in English hopefully in the next day or so. Or you can listen in the Hebrew. Okay, so now this is our big topic. What is the king allowed to do? And what we're going to do right now is we're going to start going through all the different commandments that it says in the Torah. A king can't do this, a king can't do that, a king can't do that. Okay, first we kind of started talking about what the king can do in our Mishnah. The next Mishnah are going to go through all the things that are forbidden to the king to do. And what's very famous about this whole thing is that the Torah says, can't have a lot of wives, can't have a lot of horses, right? No wives because they'll turn his heart away. No horses because he'll go to Egypt. And because that's where a lot of the horses were, and we don't want people going back to Egypt. And no, not a lot of wealth. And we know very famously that Shlomo HaMelech did all these three things and actually also fell because of those things. And exactly what the Torah said, don't do because this, Shlomo HaMelech actually fails in them. He marries too many people, too many wives. He marries the daughter of Paro, and she turns his heart away, and he has a lot of horses, and they take him back to Egypt. So we're going to deal with this today as well. So we have a lot to deal with, so let's get started. The first thing is we're still in the previous Mishnah where it says that he can go through people's land and he gets the booty from the war. So when they go out to war and they take from other nations, goes to the king first. Okay, it means people have to share with the king. In what way do they share with the king? We're going to see right now. Tanu Rabbanan. So the Braita says, very bottom of Kaf Amud, Otzrot Melachim LaMelech. Obviously, whatever they conquer from the other king goes straight to the king, right? You get all the king's jewels and all that. That's going to go to the king. Ushar bizasha bozizim, but everything else they get from the nation, mechza LaMelech u'mechza l'am. The king gets half, and the people get half. Okay, we're going to get to this. Why half? We'll see in a bit. Amalei Abai leRav Dimi. For Amalei leRav Acha, so Abai said either to Rav Dimi or Rav Acha. He said the following: Bishlama utzrot hamelech lamelech. I get that the king gets whatever was from the other king that was conquered, or chedemilta. That's just what usually happens. But elashar bizasha bozizim mechza lamelech u'mechza l'am. Where do we get though that the king gets half of whatever the nation captured? Dichtiv. Well, by Shlomo HaMelech it says, Vayimshechu laHashem l'nagid, when they made him into king, it says he became the king. Okay, the nagid is kind of the representative of the people. Ulit tzadok. Okay, now what it says there is Ulit tzadok kohen, as if, and also tzadok kohen was kind of coronated as the high priest. But the way you read it, and this is a tactic of drashot, which we've seen lots of times, they ignore the rest of the pasuk and they put it together as if there wasn't a comma between Nagid and Sadok, but he was a Nagid and Sadok, as if he and Sadok are equal. Makish Nagid Tzadok. So they say whatever's true for the Nagid or whatever's true for Tzadok is true for the Nagid. Mat Tzadok mechzalo mechzalachiv. Now the kohen gadol gets half. What does he get half of? Well, half of the lechem apanim, the showbread every week, was divided. Half would go to the kohen gadol, and half would go to the rest of the kohanim who were working that week. So matzadok mechzalo mechzalachav, just like he would get half and his brothers would get half. Ach nagid mechzalo mechzalachav. Same thing with the king. The king gets half, and the rest of it is divided equally among everybody else. Now they want to know tzadok ufei menalim. Where do we get that tzadok got half of the showbread, right? And not tzadok, but the kohen gadol in general. In this pasuk, it happens to be tzadok. Tanya Rebbe Omer Baitala Haron Ulebanav. When it talks about the showbread, it says it's for Aaron and his sons. And the way they view this pasuk is Aaron is 50% of the pasuk, and the sons are 50% of the pasuk. Mechza Aaron u'mechza banav. So half goes to Aaron, who was the kohen gadol at the time. Half goes to his sons. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we're going to go Mishnah into the details of what in Sefer Dvarim when it talks about when the people are going to ask for a king, and what are the rules for the king. Lo yarbelo nashim ela shmona esrei. He shouldn't have a lot of wives. That's what the pasuk says. Okay, and I'll read you the whole pasuk. Lo yarbelo nashim Velo yasur levavo, and they won't turn his heart away. Velo kesef v'zahav lo yarbel ma'od. He shouldn't have a lot of money. Okay, we're going to get to that after. But the Torah actually gives you a reason. It's very unique. The Torah gives you a reason. Today we're going to learn why only here does the Torah give a reason, and why more so, why does it not give the reason for mitzvot in other places? So, lo yirbelo nashim ela shmona esrei. We get to this magic number 18. Today we're going to learn how they got to the magic number of 18. Okay, you can't have more than 18 wives. That's a lot. Okay, you might have thought 2 was a lot, 3 was a lot. No, 18. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, marbehu lo. That's one opinion, by the way. We're going to see 3 opinions here. Marbehu lo. Rabbi Yehuda says, oh, you can have as many as you want, actually. You can have more than 18. Ubilvan shelo yu mesirot et libo. It has nothing to do with numbers. It has to do with, are they going to turn your heart away? Now, obviously, it's a little tricky because you don't know, right? Shlomo Melech didn't think it was going to happen, and it did. But Rabbi Yehuda basically says, as long as they don't turn his heart away, it's all fine. Rabbi Shimon Omer, afilu achatu mesirat libo ha'isa le'isena. It's not about numbers, even though the Torah says lo yirbelo, so we're going to have to get back to that. But it's not about numbers. It's about, will they turn his heart away? So if you have one wife and she turns her heart away, that's already forbidden for the king to do. Im ken lama ne'emar lo yirbelo nashim. So then why does it say that? Well, there's 2 things going on here. Da'afilu ka'avigail. Even if you have great wives like Abigail, who was one of the good wives of David, even if you have great wives like Abigail, they keep going back to David as kind of the paradigm of, all these things. Even if you have a great wife like Abigail, you can't have a lot. And presumably a lot means 18 also. Presumably he agrees with Tanna Kama about the number 18. So according to Rabbi Shimon, there's 2 things going on. You can't have less than 18 if they turn your heart away. They make you leave God. But you also can't have 18 who are amazing tzadikot. That also doesn't work. So now we have a bit of a problem with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda seems to say it's all about the tamei deka. It's all about the rationale behind the mitzvah, which is don't have a lot of wives because they'll turn your heart away. So Lememra, Rabbi Yehuda darish tamei deka, right? It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says, well, here's the rationale. If the rationale doesn't exist, then it's fine, right? He basically says it doesn't matter, right? It's not the numbers. It's as long as, since the pasuk says, don't have a lot of wives because they'll turn your heart away. It means if they won't turn your heart away, you can have a lot of wives. And then you can figure out the rationale for the mitzvah and then say, oh, it's not applicable to me. It's not applicable in this situation. And Rabbi Shimon, lo darish tamei deka. And Rabbi Shimon doesn't say that because Rabbi Shimon says, don't have a lot of wives even if they don't turn your heart away. And, if they're going to turn your heart away, well, it doesn't matter how many wives. Okay? And he basically detaches the tam from the mitzvah. So now you might remember, okay, why this is going to be a problem, because Rabbi Shimon is always the one who's dorish tamei deka. And now we're going to see it inside in a particular situation. But the exact opposite is true in the following situation. The Torah says, Almana lo tachbol beged almana. Don't take the cloak of a widow. Okay, if you loan money to a widow, okay, it says lo tatem mishpat ger v'yatom v'lo tachbol beged almana. Do not take the clothing of a widow. Okay, what's the problem with taking the clothing of a widow? Well, presumably she's poor. She can't afford other clothing. You're going to have to return it, right? Let's say you take it at night and you bring it back during the day. You're going to have to end up at her house. We're going to see this in a minute. You're going to end up at her house at odd times of the, right as it's getting dark, and early in the morning, people are going to start talking about her. She's a widow. This man comes to her house every day. So don't take the beged of an almanah. Now, usually almanot are widows. They're always widows, but they're usually, poor, but not always. You could have a wealthy widow, right? It's not necessarily connected. So the question is this only applicable to a poor woman or even to a wealthy woman who you don't have to return her clothes every day? Okay, so lo tachbo ditanya almana bein shianiya bein shiashira, whether she's poor, whether she's wealthy, emim mashkenimota. You can't take collateral from her. Shenemar lo tachbo beged almana divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda here doesn't darshan tamei deka. He doesn't say, I don't care about the rationale about this mitzvah. It says, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't start saying, oh, well, it's not really applicable if she's wealthy. We don't do that. That's the exact opposite of what he does here. And Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ashira mimashkeninota, aniya emi mashkeninota. Rabbi Shimon does what we call darshan tamei deka. He says the reason for this pasuk is, right, don't do it for a poor person, but for a wealthy person, of course you can. V'ata chayav lachzir la. What's the problem? Why can't emi mashkinim ota? Because ata chayav lachzir la, you have to return it to her. V'ata masiah shem ra b'shchinotea. You're going to make a bad name for her among her neighbors. Now, I already told you why, but we're going to see right now. Amrina my kamar. They say, first of all, let's just understand what this is. Well, hachi kamar mitoch she'atam mashkina. If you're going to take something from her, and she's poor and she needs it, ata chayav lachzir la. You have to bring it back to her every day. Because of that, ata masiah shem ra b'shchinotea. Because you're going to come at exactly when it's getting dark and when it's getting light, and people will say, oh, did he sleep in her house that night? So because of that, we don't take it. What do you see here? Alma Rabbi Yehuda lo darish tamid dekha, Rabbi Shimon darish tamid dekha. So here, their opinions are exactly the opposite. So now we have to reconcile this. So now we're going to say, and this is true because we've seen this in other places, Alma Rabbi Yehuda lo darish tamid dekha. Really, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't try to figure out the reason for the mitzvah and then apply it only in certain situations, like he did with the almanah. Right? He doesn't do that. He said it applies across the board. We don't start trying to think, right? It's a fascinating topic in and of itself. Can you try to figure out the rationale? Do we know the rationale behind this? We can assume we know, but maybe we're wrong, right? So we don't do that. But why is this case different? This case is obviously different because Shanei Hacha did mefarish Talmud Dekra, because the pasuk tells us why. The pasuk says, it's not like we're trying to figure it out. Lo takbol beged amana. Why not? Because you'll end up taking her stuff. You'll have to give it back. It'll make her a bad name. No, it's basically because matam lo yerbelo nashim mishum de lo yasur levavo. It says it explicitly in the pasuk, and that's why in this case it's only if it's going to cause his heart to turn away. Rabbi Shimon amar lecha. Rabbi Shimon, how can he respond? Well, michti ba'alma darshin and tamid dekha. Yes, in general, we do try to come up with the reason behind the mitzvah, the rationale. But im kain lichtov kra. If that's the case, then let's take our situation. The Torah could have simply said, Lo yerbelo nashim, v'lishtok, and be silent after that. If the pasuk had just written, Lo yerbelo nashim, what would I have assumed? Ana amina, I would say, Matam lo yerbeh, mishum de lo yasur. Why can't I have a lot of wives? So that they don't turn my heart away. Lo yasur lamali. So why did it add that? Right, it's fascinating. If in general, you don't need to, you can darshan Talmud Dekha, then the pasuk wouldn't say anything. And it should have just said, Lo yerbelo nashim. So why does it add lo yasul? To teach you afilu achat u'mesirat libo haris lo yisa'ena. To say, on the one hand, lo yerbelo nashim, because they're going to cause your heart to turn away, but also, if anyone causes your heart to turn away, you can't marry her either. And that's what's added by the lo yasur levavo, which theoretically is really, or practically is totally unnecessary. So now, if that's the case, and it's only one, could turn its heart away, so then why does it say lo yerbelo? Elamani became lo yerbet afilu ka'avigal, and that's how Rabbi Shimon gets to the split, because his theory is, why does it say two parts of this pasuk when really you only needed one part and you would have assumed the second? It's to say there's two things going on here, which is exactly what it says in the Mishnah. Number one, even one who turns your heart away is a problem because of the second part, and then so why does it say lo yerbet? Even great, amazing women, you can't marry too many of them. Okay, now where do we get to the number 18? Tichtiv, pasuk about David. It says, "Vayivaldu David." Again, we're using him as our paradigm. Banim bechevron. He had sons in Hebron. Remember, that's where he ruled first. Only later he rules over all of Israel. We talked about that yesterday. What sons did he have? Well, we're going to have 6 sons, all born to 6 wives. Okay, so we have Ahi b'cholo. His bechor is Amnon, lachinomi Israelite. We'll get back to Amnon later today. Umishneu kilav lavigal eshet navala karmali. The second one, Hashlishi Avshalom ben Ma'acha, the famous, right, married Avshalom. Hariviya Adoniah ben Chagid, he also tries to rebel against David, right? These sons were not actually, most of them were not the greatest of sons. Adoniah in the end, right, tries to take over instead of Shlomo. Ve'achamishi Shvatya ben Avital, Vashishi Yitra'am le'egla eshet David. Okay, we're going to get back to Egla and who was Egla. Okay, so Eila Yoldu leDavid b'Chevron. These are the 6 children that were born to him from 6 wives. Now, the Navi says to him later, when the story of Bathsheba happens, now people ask them, where's Bathsheba in the list? That's a whole question, but we're going to leave that aside. But in the story of Bathsheba, it says, okay, it says, right, if this was too little for you, right, then now you went into Bathsheba, I could have added for you kahena v'kahena. I would have added you more, okay, like these and like these. So now you can see where this is going. Kahena sheet, v'kahena sheet. Sheet is 6. Right? So he had 6. God would have added to him another 6. and another 6, meaning I could have given you 18 wives if that's what you wanted. Okay? That comes out to 18. So that means from there they learned he could have had 18. Now we're going to get into a mathematical question here. You could have done this differently. You could have said, like these is another 6, and then in the end you have 12, and then double that, you get to 24. Okay? Now, you're saying, okay, I want to go back to what you're saying in the chat. Yes, it's true that Bathsheba was after. That's why she wasn't mentioned there. That's true. The problem is that when he says kahena v'kahena, he's standing later when David clearly had at least Bathsheba as his wife in addition. Okay, so there's a question. Now, it could be he's just taking her out of the picture because he's saying, before you married her, you could have had kahena v'kahena. Maybe that's the way to understand it. Anyway, that there's a question we're going to get back. Also, what about Michal? She was also married to him, and we're going to have to deal with that. But okay. So now they say you could have gotten to 24. And in fact, Ravina even adds, there's actually a bright that says, and basically 24. Okay, there's a bright that says it's not 18. Okay, this magic number 18 that we always think of, 18 wives, actually there's a bright that says 24. And Ravina says it's based on understanding kahena is another 6. And then altogether you have 12. So when it says v'chahena, you double that and you get to 24. And all the more so, Leman de Darish Vav, if you're going to Darshim Vavim, okay, so then you're going to get to 48 because you're going to say, and it also says Vichahen. So you're going to have Kahena. It's another 6, that gets you to 12. Kahena is double that, you get to 24. And Vichahena, because it said in the second Kahena, and you're going to get to 48. And then Arba'im B'Shmona Habu, and in fact, there's a bright that says, Lo Yerbel Lo Nashim Yoter Arba'im B'Shmona. And there is an opinion that says, the problem with having too many wives is only once you get to past 48. Okay, it's a little bit hard to imagine a king getting to 48, although there are, unfortunately, or whatever, there are situations where kings have that many wives, but, hopefully not in our kings. Okay, we don't follow those opinions, but it is to be noted that there's an opinion that it's 24, and there's an opinion that it's 48. Vitana dida my time, so why doesn't our Tana hold that way? Well, Amar Kana, Makish Kahena Batra, the Kahena Kama. It says Kahena v'Kahena, both are the same. Ma Kahena Kama sheet, Av Kahena Batra sheet. Just like the first Kahena is 6, the second one is also 6. Okay. Now they get to the question that I mentioned before, Vahavi Michal. But Michal was married to David then, okay? We had the whole story of Michal and all that. She was married to him. So Amarav, Egla Zo Michal. Okay, this woman, Egla, that we didn't know who she was, it's actually Michal. Okay, she was beloved to him like a calf. Okay, I don't know if you'd like that term of endearment, but some people call their wives sweet pea or something like that. It seems, there's all sorts of terms of endearment. And in fact, they say there is someone who called their wife Egla. Okay, I don't know if you want to take an example from Shimshon, but okay, he said if you had it, this is when Shimshon, they bring about Shimshon's demise by cutting his hair, and it was because Delilah gave away his secret. And he said, had you not plowed in my wife Delilah, obviously relating to sexual relations with her, you wouldn't have revealed this about me. And he basically says, he calls her Eglati, okay, which is supposed to be a term of endearment. Okay, so now you have she's Egla. But now the Gemara says, how could she be Egla? Did she have sons? In other words, what do we have here? We have Yitraam, interesting name, is the son of Egla. But it says later on, this is after, if you remember, there's the story where David is dancing in front of the Aron Habrit, and she looks out the window and she mocks him and embarrasses him, and then she gets punished. And it says there that she didn't have any children on account of that incident. So Amar of Chisda, ad yom motalo ayala b'yom motah hayala. It says until the day of her death, until and not including. On the day of her death, she gave birth. You might say, what a strange coincidence, but actually a lot of women died in childbirth in those days. So it's definitely possible, right? It's not crazy to think that she died as she gave birth. Well, but wait, this doesn't make sense. Because when was this son mentioned? When David was king in Hebron. But the whole thing with Michal, if you want to say it happened on the day of her death, it happened when David was already king of Jerusalem later. She was by the window, Mifazez and Parker Lipnei Hashem, Vativez, right? And she embarrasses him, or she looked at him in an embarrassed, like, oh wow, I'm so embarrassed by you. Va'amar Rabbi Yehuda v'Tamer Rabbi Yosef shkata Michal lemitrapsa. Okay, she basically gets punished there, and her punishment is she's not going to have sons. So obviously she couldn't have had sons before, because there it said that she's not going to have sons until the day of his until the day of her death, right? That the whole idea is she's not going to have sons until she dies, and even if it's the day she died, well, that can't be according to the story, because then the son would not have been born when David was in Hebron. Ela ema ado tomase hayala mikam ve'elach lo hayala. Could be until that day she might have had sons, but later she didn't have any sons. Okay, now it could be that means also they died at that point. Okay, that they died, or just it was talking about until that point. From that point going forward, she could have had sons. So it's possible that Egla is Michal, and that resolves our problem of where's Michal in that pasuk, because she was already married to David at the time. And the whole point is that if you add Michal to the list, then there's already 7, and then we have to have more, right? Then we have to have, it would be 21 and not 18. Vayikach David od pilagshim v'nashim b'Yerushalayim. Okay, now it says David took more pilagshim and women, and this is before Bathsheba. So how does that work? So they say, no, he had other wives, but that all is counted within the 18. Okay, and he also had concubines, which we're going to talk about right now. My nashim my pilagshim. What's the difference between wives and concubines? Rabbi Yehuda Amarav nashim b'ktubah u'b'kiddushin, pilagshim below ktubah below kiddushin. Okay, this is a radical idea about pilagshim, that you can have such a concept of concubines, which is you have a woman, which is not with a ketubah and not with not with kiddushin. Okay, it's very strange because we have the whole Masechet kiddushin. That's how you betroth the woman. Where do pilagshim come in? Actually, Gila Fine made reference to this in her course. But I want to just put it out there that some people think that concubine, I think it's the Rambam, I forget now, but I think it's the Rambam who says concubines are only for kings. They're not for regular people. They're just for kings. Only kings can have concubines, not anyone else. It's a whole thing about concubines. Anyone who wants to research it can look it up. It's a bit of a crazy topic. But we have a super long daf, so we're not going to spend time in it today. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Arba me'ot yeladim hayulo leDavid. Okay, now we get into a very strange thing, which is David. Now we're talking about his warriors. And who are these warriors made up of? And the strongest of his warriors, they were made up of 400 sons that he had. Kulam b'nei Yifat Torah hayu. And he had taken women from war. Remember the section of the Torah of Eshet Yifat Torah? He had taken women from war who were captives. He married them, so to speak, or betrothed them or something, right? There's a whole huge debate about whether they have to convert first before you can have relations with them, or you can have relations once before you convert them. This seems to think that you can have relations with them once before you actually go through the whole process of that, or before they actually do some sort of conversion process. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the halachic details of this, but according to this, he had 400 children from Nishei Yifat Torah. Okay, they were non-Jews basically, and they had these non-Jewish haircuts because their mothers weren't Jewish. And they would each sit in their carriage of gold, and they were the heads of the legions. And they were the strong, the real big. As we say, Jews often aren't the strongest and the biggest, so they were his balei agrofim. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Tamal bat Yifat Torah. Now we're going to get into the whole story of Amnon but Tamar and how Amnon rapes Tamar, and we're going to talk about some details of the story. But the first thing they want to point out here, the reason why we get to this is because we say she was one of those children. Now, she wasn't necessarily a big warrior. She was one of those children that was born to an Eshet Yifat Torah. How do we know this? Well, there's a strange thing that Tamar says to Amnon when he comes to rape her. She says, she doesn't want to have relations with him right now, so she tries to push him up, and she says, listen, why don't we just wait to ask my father? I'm sure he won't prevent me from marrying you. Now, what do you mean? They had the same father. How possibly could they marry each other? It's a rayot. King David would never agree to that. So the assumption must be, if you thought that they could get married, which she seems to think they could get married fair and square, right? They're sister and brother. No way would David have allowed this. Now we must infer from here, Yifat Torah. She was the daughter of Yifat Torah, which means she wasn't Jewish, which means that they weren't really related halachically, because even though they had the same father technically, she's really considered by her mother, not her father at all. and therefore they're not really related. And that's the only reason why she could have said such a thing, which is super interesting. Obviously, you could say she was just trying to push him off, and didn't really mean it. But that's what they understand, and that's why they think she was the daughter of a Fator. Now we're going to do a little Tanakh study, and we're going to learn parts of the story, what exactly happened. So we had a friend, Yonadav ben Shimon, which Shema was the brother of David. He was a very wise man. Well, the Gemara says about him, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Ish chacham l'risha. He was a smart, deceitful person. Well, I wouldn't really call him a good, smart person, because he gave the idea to Amnon to rape Tamar. Vayomer madua ta kacha dal ben Amelech. Why are you so sad? Vayomer lo Yonadav shchav al mishkavcha v'atkal. Go pretend that you're sick, and basically, feign sickness. Ask, I think he says to ask David to bring Tamar to cook you some food. And she'll make you some food in front of you. Okay, this is so how does the Gemara understand that she cooked some food? She fried food for him. Why fried food specifically did he want? Because, okay, we all know this. They even say it's like latkes or something, because they don't taste good if you bring them from far, right? They only taste good fresh. So she would have to make it in the room with him, and that was the tactic. But okay, so then they don't get into the details of the rape. They save us for the whole, the unpleasantry. But then it says after the rape, he hates her, really, really hates her. So the question is, why? My timer, right? I mean, you could give all sorts of reasons. He never loved her before, right? This isn't love. Rape someone, that's not love. And that's the obvious way to go here. I actually heard a fascinating shiur all about rhetoric and how language teaches you a lot. They compared the story of, it was Eli Wilczek, someone actually compared the story of Yehuda and Tamar to Amnon and Tamar, and showing how the language is very, very different. And you could tell from the language already, from like the first word of the story, that Amnon just had bad in his mind, and it was nothing good about it at all. Whereas, perhaps in the Yehuda and Tamar story, it wasn't all coming from a bad place. Anyway, that's all separate things. So my timer. So now the question is, why does he? So the Gemara gives a different reason as to why he hates her. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, the assumption is that something must have switched. Okay, something must have changed. So what's the reason? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Nima nikshera lo v'asato krut shufcha. Okay, she basically ruined his sexual organ by her pubic hair, kind of ruined his sexual organ and turned him into a krut shufcha, which is someone who's incapable of having relations. If you say that, it just happened while he was raping her, that's not her fault. Why should he hate her for it? So they say she did it intentionally. Okay, maybe she was right for doing that, but she did it intentionally, and that's why he hates her. Is that really true? Okay, so there's a pasuk say from there we learn that Jewish women don't have pubic hair. So what does this mean? So the Kohen has a footnote that says basically, it's because the women shaved. It was like the common custom was to shave. So, how could it be then that her pubic hair has gotten in the way? Again, that's a whole weird thing. They didn't have pubic hairs. Okay, whatever. We're going to put that aside. Shani Tamar Debat Yafat Torah Havai. And now we go back to the fact, she was the daughter of Rabbi Yafat Torah. It's another further proof. She wasn't considered as one of the Jewish women. By the way, this whole story in general, there's all these references to Yosef. Okay, the Ketone Pasim. You can just do. I mean, again, you can go off on a million tangents today into lots of interesting things, and go and analyze the story and see the comparisons to the Yosef story. But here, she puts ashes on her hand, and the Ketone Pasim that was on her, she tore. Satana Mishmei Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Gadir Gadol Gadra Tamar Botasha. They said she did even more than that. What did she do at that moment? She made a big, like a, what do you call it? A fence. She put up a big fence. Okay, Rashi says here, Gadra Tamar b'dim'ata v'zakata v'nahagat ma b'bizayon. This is actually really interesting. She does a whole public display. Nowadays, right, if someone, God forbid, is raped, right, we always talk about, right, either they hide away, close up, they don't want to talk to anyone about it, or they can make a big deal about it, right? She made a big deal about it, and she wanted everybody to know. And what happens when everybody knows? Well, they realize that we have to do something about this to prevent rape from happening, right? She was like the first, woman to say, I was raped and we got to deal with this. Maybe not the first. I mean, Tamar also goes out and, Tamar from the Torah. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting things to say about this, but we're going to keep reading. Amru libnot malachim kach. When they saw this, they said, "Wow! If this is what the daughters of kings happens to them, libnot hedyotot alacha kama, right? If the daughter of a king could get raped, anybody could get raped, right? You would think maybe she has the ability to protect herself more. Im litznuad kach, and she's a nice tsanua, modest woman, right? All the more so people who are less modest. That's a whole question in general, right? It's rape happened more to modest or immodest people, not going to go there either. But Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, so Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Botasha Gazlu, turning out Amabet, ala Yichud, Ba'ala Pnuya. Okay, we're going to have to understand what this means. So on Yichud and on unmarried women. So the Gemara says, Yichud, what's Yichud? Seclusion. Seclusion, Do'oraita. That was Do'oraita. That was already by Torah law was forbidden. Okay, how do we know this? We learned this before. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Tzadak. Remez lichud min Torah minayin. It's interesting. This is just an allusion to it. It's not actually a Torah law, but they assume if there's an allusion, the Torah was already there, and it can't be they instituted that only after the story of Tamar and Amnon and Tamar. Shne'emar ki yisitcha achicha ben imecha. So if your brother, the son of your mother, pulls you away to worship idols, now why would it be the brother, the son of your mother? What? Ben misit, but ben ave no misit, right? The father, if you share the same father, what? He's not going to pull you away to worship other gods? Ben mityachedim mimo ve'en acher mityachedim kol arayot shebetorah. It's to teach you that why did they say ben imecha? Because a ben, normally you're not allowed to, what's seclusion? Seclusion is you're not allowed to be alone in a room, a man and a woman, but who are forbidden to each other, mishum isur arayot. Okay? There's exceptions to the rule. For example, a woman who's in nida is allowed to be with her husband, right? Unless they just got married and she's in nida. Okay, that's all a separate story. But once they've already been together, they can be together alone. A mother with a son and a father with a daughter. Okay, those are three cases that it's allowed. But otherwise, arayot are not allowed to be alone with each other because they might come to sleep with each other, and it's forbidden by Torah law to sleep with each other. So this is to teach you, why would you have the son of a mother meet the other son of a mother? Because sons often live with their mothers, and then they're with their brothers as well. They're half brothers, share the same mother. And that's why the Mesi could likely happen in this case. Again, this is definitely not the simple reading, but it's a drasha on why does it specifically say Beni Mecha? It's a little bit strange. So from there, we learn that only in this case is Yichud allowed, but in other cases, Yichud isn't allowed. And therefore, Yichud is already forbidden from the Torah. So what did they really change after Tamar? They said is you can't be secluded with an unmarried woman who's not Erva, unless she's a Nida, and then she is. But if she's not a Nida, then she's regular, forbidden. That's actually not forbidden, and they made a Gzera on that in order to prevent rape from happening. Okay, moving on. One of the other children we mentioned, this all we got off on because we were talking about the 18, how we got to the 18, and that was from the 6 sons that we talked about. So one of them, Adoniah ben Chagit, we hear about him in Naseh Lomar Ani Amloch. He tries to become king, and it says et Naseh. He was kind of bragging, being out there in a place that he really didn't belong. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, he darshins here melamed shebikesh lahalmo v'lo halamto. He tried to put on the crown of David, but it didn't fit on his head, right? Which is a way of saying he really didn't belong in what he was doing. Vayaslo rechev u'parashim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav is also an interesting drasha. So they say, my revuta, what? All kings' sons have that much stuff. It wasn't such a big deal that he had all this. Well, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, kulan nitulei tchol v'chalkukei kapot raglayim hayu. Apropos, like people who take steroids to be better athletes. So here he wanted, his people were unique in that they removed their spleens and they took off like the skin on their feet or something in order to make them run faster. Okay, it was a tactic they used. He used on his people. Sounds a little cruel to make them, be the fastest runners. Okay, and that's why it said he had all these people. It really meant that's why it says they were ratzim. They ran faster than anybody else. Okay, that's sort of putting Adoniah in a bad light. Okay, that was all to get to the women. Now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah, Lo Yarbelo Susim Ela Kedemer Kavto. So the king can't have horses. It says in the Torah, let's just read the pasuk, Lo Yarbelo Nashim, Rak Lo Yarbelo Susim. He shouldn't have a lot of horses. Now pay close attention. V'lo Yashiv Ta'am Mitzrayma, so that he doesn't bring the nation back to Egypt. Laman Harbot Sus. okay, in order to have more horses, except it doesn't say horses, it says horse in singular. So we're going to get back to this. It should have said Laman Harbot Susim, right? So they don't bring you back to Egypt in order to get lots of horses, because in Egypt, that's where most of the horses were in those days, and they didn't want the Jews going back to Egypt. So the Yorbelo Susim Elakademer Kavto. Well, he can in order to have stuff for his chariot. And the king needs a chariot, he needs horses for that, but more than that, he can't have. Kesef zahav lo Yorbelo Ma'od Elakidei Litain Aspanya or Afsanya. There's different ways of reading it. There's different girsaot, but we'll just go with Aspanya, which is in order for his, he could have Kesef and Zahav in order to pay the salaries for his soldiers, okay, for defense, basically. It's interesting to think that the defense came from the king himself, right? Now it comes from the country, not from the personal, but it sounds like it's personal, but not for his personal use, but he can have it for what he needs for the army. Because Sefer Torah, the Shmo, he has to write a Sefer Torah specifically for him. If he goes out to war, he takes it with him. When he comes back, he brings it with him. Yoshev Bedin Kimo, when he sits to judge, the Torah is with him. What do you mean? King doesn't judge. Oh, different answers given. Maybe Machupe David, who we say do judge. Some other answers as well. Mesev, he can when he eats, it's with him. Some people say with him in an aron, like closed up. It's not like it sits on the table with him. That wouldn't be appropriate. It's supposed to be with him according to the Torah, and he can read from it all the days of his life. Okay, we're going to get to some places where he shouldn't bring it, like the bathroom. Okay. Tano Rabbanan, lo yerbelo susim. So now we're going to bring a braita. This is classic. The Mishnah just kind of says it. Now we're going to bring darshan things from the psukim. Okay, they actually did bring a few psukim here, which is a little atypical for the Mishnah, but now we're going to really have drashot from the psukim in the Midrash Halacha that the Gemara quotes for us. Lo yerbelo susim yachol afilu kedei merkavto parashat. Well, it says you shouldn't have horses. Maybe it means not even for his chariot and things like that. Talmud lomar lo. For his own it says lo yarbeh lo susim for him, meaning for his own personal reasons. Lo ino marbeh avam marbehu kedei richbo parasha, but he can have for his chariots. So hamani became susim. So why does it say then susim? Susim habatlanim. He can't have unnecessary ones that are doing nothing, that are just sitting in a stable, that are there for decorative purposes, right? That we have a beautiful stable with beautiful horses, right? Can't do that. How do we know that even one horse, this goes back to like the wives, one horse that's useless is a problem? Talmud lomar laman harbot sus, and that's where so that you don't have horses, but it says it in singular horse, even one. So now they say, so then why do you say susim in plural? If even one unnecessary one is a problem, why does it say it in plural? When it says the lo harbot sus, it's not a lotas. It says laman harbot sus in order to have. That's in a positive formulation. So there's no mitzvah lotase. But a mitzvah lotase is where it says lo yerbelo susim, and they wanted you to know, if you just said lo yerbelo sus, it would be one sus you buy, lotase. After that, okay, you're done. But if you say susim, it means that every single sus you've done a lotase, you're going to get lashes for each time you bought one. Well, now they say, let's go back to that drasha. You said lo meant only for himself, but for his chariot, of course he can. And that we learned from the word lo. But what if you didn't have lo? What? He wouldn't be able to have for his chariot? Of course you would assume the king can have for his own chariot. So what does the lo come to tell you? Lo tzricha la'afushe. What it means is, lo you can't have. You can have for your chariot, but there's something extra here. What does it mean? Well, it means for your chariot, you can have actually more than what you need. You can have spares waiting. If it's for your chariot, you can have as many as you want, but for your own personal use, you can't use any at all. You can't have for like no real reason. And now we're going to see the same kind of thing for kesef v'zahav. Kesef v'zahav lo yerbelo ela kidei litin Espanya. Tanu Rabbanan, again, we're going to bring a midrash halacha. Kesef zahav lo yarbelo yachol afilu kedei litain aspamya. Maybe also you can't even have for your soldiers. Talmud lomar lo. Again, the word lo ino marbeh aval marbehu kedei litain aspamya. Not for yourself, but yes, for the army. Talmud katav rachmana lo halav hachi avamina kedei litain aspamya nami lo tzricha laharvacha. Same kind of drasha, right? What do you mean? You wouldn't think you could have money for the army? Of course you could. So they're telling you can have extra money for the army. Okay, this is something we unfortunately know from right up close that if what we needed for the army was X a year, 2 years ago, now what we need is way more. You have to have money in spare, waiting there in order to be able to use it when, unfortunately, you might need it. So now they say, now we go back. We darshan the lo for susim, we darshan the lo for kesef zahav. Now the question is, it also said lo benashim. by the wives. Hashadamar lo lidrasha. Since now you're darshaning this, we're lo your belo nashim my darshabe. What are you going to do with that one? Lemiute hedyotot. Lo your belo nashim means the king can't have a lot of wives, but other people, you want to have 48 wives, you want to have, go for it. Okay. Now, again, they're not exactly promoting it, but they are saying there's no negative prohibition if you do it, only for the king. Okay, now we're going to go to a contradiction between how many horses and how many stables did King Solomon have. Rabbi Yehuda Rami K'tiv says there's a contradiction here. K'tiv vayhi l'shlomo 40,000 urvot susim lemerkavto. He had 40,000 stables for his horses or stalls. Uchtiv vayhi l'shlomo 4,000 urvot susim. He had 4,000. Now you might say 4,000, 40,000 is a difference of a zero, but that's a big zero. Okay, so was it 4,000? Was it 40,000? Hakitzad. Well, imar be'im elef itztablaotayu. If he had 40,000 areas like houses to house, stables, I would say. Each one had 4,000 stalls, so 40,000 it's tablaot with 4,000 urvot, which would be 160 million horses. And if there were 4,000 either which way it's the same, 40 times 4,000, whether it was 4,000 of the stables or 4,000 of the stalls and 40,000 of the other. Okay, that's a very large number. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak Rami. He also said there's a contradiction between other psukim. K'tiv, ein kesef nichshav yimesh shlomo l'muma. Money was worth nothing because King Solomon had so much money that the value of money went down to zero. Okay, Uktiv v'yitem shlomo tekesef b'Yushalayim kavanim. Different pasuk says the value of money was like stones. Stones could be either precious stones, it was worth a lot, or maybe it's just stones. Stones are worth something, they're not worth nothing. Okay, so that seems to contradict. Well, lo kasha kan kodem shenasah Shlomo bat Paro, kan lachar shenasah Shlomo bat Paro. The famous marriage that really brings to Shlomo's demise is he marries the daughter of Paro, and she turns his heart away. And from there, he gets punished and he loses his money, and therefore the value of money went up because he had less money, so that caused the value of everyone else's money to go up. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, if we're already talking about Bat Shlomo, they're going to use this vision to kind of say a really big idea, which is when he married her, at that moment, Yarad Gavriel, the angel Gabriel came, v'na'atz kaneh bayam, he stuck a reed in the sea, v'helas yirton, it caused a huge fission, and alav nivneh krach gadol sheberomi. So there was this huge hole that was formed, and in that hole, Rome was built. And that's basically saying Shlomo built the temple, and then he basically planted the seeds for its destruction by allowing Rome to be built. Okay, why this vision and the story? It's a good question, but we're going to move on. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, you get the idea though that he really caused. That was the beginning of the end. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, now we get to a big question. Why did the Torah not give reasons for things? Well, we're going to learn it from here. Because when the Torah did give a reason in these two psukim, well, one of the greatest of all people fell, and failed through them. Right, I'm above this. I can have a lot of wives, and it won't turn my heart away. And exactly what it says in the pasuk is going to happen to him. Oh, I can find horses in other places. I don't need to go to Egypt. And in fact, what happens? His own personal chariot. He had to buy horses specifically from Egypt. Okay. Last topic for today, Sefer Torah. We're going to start this. Kotev Sefer Torah Lishmo. He has to write his own Sefer Torah. Tanna he can't, according to this Braita, he can't use his father's Torah. We also saw that from our Mishnah. Rava now says a different halacha entirely. I mean, it's very similar, but he's talking about regular, everybody. Even if your ancestors left you a Sefer Torah, mitzvah l'chtov mishalo. There's a mitzvah to write your own Torah. Here's the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. Shene'emar, ata kitvu lachem et hashira hazot. Right, you should write down this poem from Ha'azinu, and write the Shira of Ha'azinu, but it's also about the Torah in general. Abai says, how could you say that's true? That everyone has to write a Sefer Torah and can't take their parents? They should write their own? This was only said about a king, not about everybody else. No, the king is different. Everyone else has a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. The king has a commandment to write 2 Torahs. How do we get this? Kedetanya, as it says in the following, Braita katavlo et Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is a second Torah. He has to write 2 Torahs. kotev lishmo. Okay, in the Mishnah, it just said one. And now we learn it's two. Shtei torot, echad shu yotzav v'nechneset imo, echad shmunach lo bebeikin nazav. One is in his storage house, and one he uses everywhere he goes. Otashi yotzav v'nechneset imo. Some people read this or don't read it, but they made it like a kimin kameh v'toleh b'zro'o. He made it like an amulet and would hang it on his arm. Shenemar shaviti Hashem l'negdi tami kimini balemo. Okay, how you write a Sefer Torah is so small. There's a big question among the commentaries. Perhaps it wasn't a full Sefer Torah, okay, but we'll get back to that later. Because it's for him to read, since you can't read a Torah in the bathhouse or in the bathroom, so in the where they would also shower, and do the. So you obviously don't bring it there. Okay, last point for today. Amar Zitra v'yitem Amar Ukva b'tchilan itznat Torah l'Yisrael b'kitav ivri u'lashon hakodesh. If you have the Koren, definitely use it here. There's great pictures. Which is in the beginning, the Torah was given in Kitav Ivri. Now you might think Ivri is Ivrit. It's not Kitav Ivri. It's ancient Hebrew script. It doesn't look anything like. It's a little more like Chinese, I would say. And well, I'm sure people who know Chinese would say it doesn't look anything like Chinese, but to me it looks a little like Chinese. And Lashon HaKodesh, it was written in the holy language in Hebrew, but written in this Kitav, this font. This is basically fonts. Ezra, the Torah was re-given in the time of Ezra, Bichtav Shurit, that's what we have, the writing that we use nowadays, Bichtav Shurit, and Lashon Arami in Aramaic. So some people say, what do you mean? It wasn't given in Aramaic, but some people say, excuse me, it was translated into Aramaic in Ezra's time. Berurula and Israel, but in the end, the Jews chose Kitav Ashurit to Lashon HaKodesh. Okay, it was written in the Kitav Ashurit, that's what we use, and Lashon HaKodesh, that's what we have today. And they left for Hedyoto, we'll see in a minute who they are, the ancient Hebrew script and the Aramaic. Man Hedyotot, who are these? Amrav Chisda Kutai, which we call nowadays the Shomronim, the Kutim. My Ktav Ivrit, Amrav Chisda Ktav Libona. Okay, they didn't even know what Ktav Ivrit was. They explained it as Ktav Libona. That doesn't help us, but the pictures help us, the people who did the research to figure out what this was. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer. Now we're going to make a comparison between Ezra and Moshe, and we'll stop in the middle of this section. He really was the one who was supposed to get the Torah. If Moshe hadn't come before him, he would have been the one to get the Torah. But Moshe, how do we know this? Because Moshe went up to God. That's when he gets the Torah. But Ezra, he went up from Babylonia. Now he didn't go up to Har Sinai. He went on Aliyah, but they say, hu Allah, he could have gotten the Torah. My Aliyah hamor kan Torah, af Aliyah hamor lahalan Torah. So the Aliyah here must also be a reference to Torah. Another comparison that shows that he could have gotten the Torah, because it says by Moshe that God commanded me to give you the chukim and the mishpatim, the statutes and the laws. And be'ezra hu omer ki Ezra heichin levavo lidrosh et Hashem la'asot u'lelameh b'Yisrael chok u'mishpat. Okay, and then they say, even right, so he was also given the ability to teach the people chok u'mishpat. So that's why the font was changed. How we read the Torah was changed in his day. It was as if he kind of got like a new Torah. Okay, big long daf. Let's do a very quick review. We started with what part of the booty the king gets and how we learn that. Then we got to Lo Yerbelo Nashim, 3 different opinions, how to understand this. And then do we darshan Talmud Dekra? No, this seems to contradict Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda. How do we explain that? Then we got to, how did we get to 18? From there, we got off on all these tangents about the children of David and the story of Amnon and Tamar and Adoniah. And then we got to the Susim and the Zahav, and we darshaned a bunch of those psukim and what the king can do, what the king can't do, right? Where the line's drawn. And then we got to the Sefer Torah. And we also talked about how the whole issue of not having the reasons in the Torah is really because of what happened with Shlomo. Obviously, it's a bit of a question. That happened later, after the Torah was written, right? Okay, but we're going to leave that question aside. This is kind of, in hindsight, you see why the Torah realized this was going to happen. And you also wonder why they then brought it in this case. But anyway, I'm going to leave that point aside right now. And with that, we finished with this comparison. We talked about the writing of the Sefer Torah. You'll see later tomorrow why we're bringing this whole section of Ezra and Moshe. Because in the end, they're going to have a drasha that connects with Mishneh Torah. So the Mishneh Torah, we assume, was 2 Torahs. We're going to see a different drasha for that tomorrow that connects with this that we started with today of the Moshe and Ezra comparison. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.